Marcelo Santoro was arrested for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Cecilia Haddad on the 7th of July 2018 in Rio de Janeiro, after kayakers discovered Haddad's fully clothed body near Woolwich in Sydney on the 29th of April, about the same time her former live-in lover Santoro flew home to Rio de Janeiro. So what happened? How could a person she loved turn into her murderer? Let's dive in for the answers. This is the disturbing story of Cecilia Haddad. The story. Cecilia Haddad had so much to live for. Young, independent, and intelligent, she had just left Brazil and started an exciting new life in Australia. But on April 29, 2018, Haddad's strangled body was found floating face down in the shallow waters of Lane Cove River. When Haddad's best friends heard the news, they were shocked and devastated, but also felt incredibly guilty. Carol Camara and Rita Maciel knew Haddad was being stalked and harassed by her ex-boyfriend, Brazilian national Marcelo Santoro. They begged her to go to the police, but when she refused, they didn't push. One time, he had forced himself into her apartment, Camara told 60 Minutes. She ran into the bedroom and she locked herself in. She got all the furniture she had around her and barricaded herself in the bedroom. She was shouting at him to leave and he was punching the door in. But he was telling her, "I just want to talk to you. You just need to listen." The last time Camara and Maciel saw Haddad was 1 week before the tragedy when Haddad visited them in Perth. When she returned from the trip, Haddad was stunned to find that Santoro had been letting himself into her Sydney apartment after secretly cutting himself a key. Despite her friend's plea to report him to the police, Haddad was adamant Santoro would never hurt her. And with Santoro being a Brazilian citizen, Haddad also did not want him to be deported. She didn't want him to have a record. She wanted him gone. But she didn't wish him bad, Camara said. Now Camara regrets not reporting him to the police herself. "I blame myself for what happened to Sika," she said. "I would have done so much better for my friend if I knew she was in danger." Finally feeling she was safe enough in her own home after discovering Santoro had booked a flight home to Brazil, Haddad returned to her apartment for the first time on April 28, 2018. But tragically, this was the day she was murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend, Santoro. Santoro came over to Haddad's apartment early that morning, insisting to come in. Haddad refused. After waiting around her apartment block for a few hours, he used his newly cut key to let himself in. Haddad was killed a few minutes after 10 a.m. Police spent months building the case against Santoro, who fled to Brazil 36 hours after he murdered Haddad. SW police detectives told 60 Minutes they had an abundance of incriminating evidence for Haddad's murder, including CCTV cameras at Santoro's home. "It's not only CCTV on the front of the house, but also out the back," Detective John Edwards told Christina Hearn. Through these cameras, they were able to track Santoro's moves in the 48 hours before the murder and straight after. Detectives also gathered accounts from friends and family about Haddad's relationship with Santoro. Edwards and his partner Hannah Packer from the NSW police used mobile towers to trace Santoro's phone on the night, then matched the movement with CCTV footage gathered from homes and businesses along the way. "Santoro's phone connected with a cell tower and we can trace him driving down to the waterfront," Edwards explained, showing a tracking map to 60 Minutes. "We believe Santoro drove all over, and when he didn't find anywhere appropriate, he kept driving around the waterfront looking for somewhere to dump the body." But the overwhelming and unimpeachable evidence the detectives gathered so far was not their last hurdle. The day after dumping Haddad's body in the river, Santoro fled Sydney and returned to his hometown in Rio de Janeiro. Because Australia does not have extradition treaties with Brazil, police could not arrest Santoro and charge him with her murder in New South Wales. An international manhunt involving Interpol and Australian and Brazilian officials ended with the arrest of Santoro 3 months after Haddad's death, and it was only after 4 years, in June 2023, when Santoro's trial was heard. At a Brazilian federal court trial where NSW detectives Hannah Packer and John Edwards presented evidence from their investigation, Santoro confessed to strangling Haddad to her death, but insisted it was an accident. Overnight, Rio de Janeiro's Federal Court of Justice jailed Santoro after he confessed to the murder before the 7-person jury, according to the Associated Press. The defendant only confessed in the jury room after extensive evidentiary material had been produced against him, the judge said. In other words, he did not confess before the Australian police when he arrived in Brazil. He did not confess before the Brazilian investigators, nor before the judicial stages he had gone through up to that day. Santoro was filmed crying while describing what he had done, saying he had returned to the house to retrieve his passport before they got into a fight. I was trying to make her shut her up, but unfortunately that's when the tragedy happened. I grabbed her neck and squeezed really hard. I didn't want to do that, he said. Prosecutor Fernando Aguiar told the trial there was a very large amount of evidence against the defendant, and the result was what we expected. Witnesses and experts from Australia gave evidence at the trial of a complicated and toxic relationship. The court heard from family members who described Haddad as a happy, hard-working young woman who loved ballet and scuba diving and was a successful corporate executive. They said she had fallen into an emotionally abusive relationship and was fearful of Santoro, who refused to leave her home and stalked her in public. The victim's father, Jose Haddad, said he spoke by phone with Cecilia Haddad the day before the murder, after she had spent a few days away from her home. Afraid Santoro would be there, she kept her father on the line while she opened the door. She told me, "Dad, he's not here, you can go to bed now," Jose Haddad said, holding back tears. Cecilia Haddad's stepmother, Andrea Haddad, also testified, saying that the victim had been long suffering psychological violence, and that she recalled her calling her crying uncontrollably, saying, "I can't live like this anymore." The victim's brother, João Haddad, gave the fourth and final testimony of the day. He described Santoro as threatening and chauvinistic and said his sister lived in fear of him. He said he saw red flags in Santoro's obsessive behavior, monitoring Cecilia Haddad's communication, oftentimes taking her phone and computer. João Haddad said his sister had blocked Santoro on all communication methods and only exchanged emails with him. She began to only write to him in English purposefully, to leave evidence that Australian authorities could quickly understand. In his testimony, João Haddad recounted several times asking his sister why she didn't just make him leave or call the police, to which she responded that she was both afraid and also felt bad because Santoro was unemployed at the time. When João Haddad found out that Cecilia Haddad was missing, he said he called Santoro's mother, who said her son was not in Brazil. But just 5 minutes later, Santoro called João Haddad saying that he was indeed in Brazil. He then received another phone call from Santoro's mother saying Santoro was in Brazil and that she was taking medication and had been confused. "I could hear Santoro's voice in the background telling her what to say," João Haddad said. One Australian police detective said Ms. Haddad had delivered an ultimatum to Santoro 10 days before she was killed, requesting he leave the apartment, and had at one point stayed with friends. Sand and vegetation from the area where Ms. Haddad's body was found, 8 kilometers from her home in Ride, were found in Santoro's car. Santoro had originally claimed to police he had returned overseas because his father was going to have heart surgery. It is understood Santoro left Australia to avoid extradition, as laws in Brazil make it difficult, with the country often reluctant to hand over its citizens to face trial overseas. Brazilian laws do, however, allow for a trial of its own nationals to be conducted for crimes committed abroad. After the trial concluded, Ms. Haddad's brother João Miller Haddad said their 5-year battle for justice had finally arrived. Her mother, Maria Lucia Muller, said it was the only thing left the family could do. "Justice has been done in Brazil's standard, of course, because if it were for me, it would be the death penalty, life in prison, but we don't have this here," she said. "So we got the maximum that we could. I'm a bit relieved, the weight of missing her and the justice that needed to be done. This piece is getting better." Santoro, now in his mid-40s, was convicted of aggravated homicide, asphyxiation, femicide, and concealment of a body, Associated Press reported. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison. His lawyer, Rubem Viana, said they intended to appeal the sentence. For Haddad's friends, the verdict was just a consolation. Camara and Maciel said they didn't think Santoro had remorse for what he did to their friend. "He took away a daughter, an auntie, a sister, a friend that we're never going to have back," Camara said. Having witnessed how acts of violence and coercion can spiral out of control, They wish for other victims and those around them to learn from Haddad's tragic story. I never saw Cecilia as the face of domestic violence. She was just this powerful woman, Kamara said. Speak up. Talk to the police, Maciel said. We are not superwomen and we can't protect everybody. But there are people who can. Thank you all for tuning in. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Don't forget to show your support by hitting the like and subscribe buttons before you go. Stay safe and see you in the next video.